or an abnormal functioning family. So what I want you to do, and I know this part of this morning isn't going to be on the most encouraging. We'll get there, trust me. But we're going to start with a little bit of reality as we come to the biblical story that we're going to look at. So here's what I want you to do, if you would, just for about 30 seconds or so. Just with the people right around you, I want you to brainstorm some of the dysfunctional families in movies and TV that you've witnessed, all right? So 30 seconds right around you, go. Come see what you can come up with. All right, start to wrap it up. So I'll share some of the ones that just came to mind as I was thinking through. See if you have some similar ones. I'm sure you have some ones I didn't think of, but there were plenty to choose from. I didn't notice any lack of ability to communicate about this, right? It's probably about as you're thinking of them, there's more and more and more that you may be thinking of in some way or another. How about the Duttons on Yellowstone? Maybe some of the more. Or the Lions on the show Empire, or maybe the Simpsons on the show The Simpsons, right? Or maybe Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. If you want to go dysfunction, I think you could probably go that direction, at least from what I hear. You want a little more old school? How about The Sopranos or The Godfather? That's, a little trouble there. Or even some ones like Tracker, one of the more recent shows, or MacGyver, where there's family dynamics that are at work in their lives to kind of shape them to who they are. Sometimes it's in the title, right? Married with Children, the Bundys, right? Or All in the Family, the Bunkers. Now, I know some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's okay, by the way. Or maybe a show like Family Guy or Modern Family. There's a lot of these shows that even have these words in the title. Even Star Wars has some pretty major family dysfunction going on, right? In that movie. And again, it's not hard to come up with examples, because I think we realize that for all of us in families, there's often some form of dysfunction. It's just a matter of how much. Mental Health America defines a dysfunctional family as characterized by conflict, misbehavior, and or abuse. People in these situations often don't feel safe, whether physically or emotionally. They're often living with a sense of constant uncertainty. They're constantly on edge. And this often has significant negative effects in their lives. Now, we may not have experienced a textbook dysfunctional family, or maybe you have. But all of us have experienced dysfunction in our families to some degree. Them just simply not working properly, the way that God designed them to work. I saw a movie recently. I would really encourage you to check it out. It's called Unsung Hero. It's a movie that tells the story of the Smallbone family who come from Australia to the U.S. under very difficult circumstances. The movie recounts their struggles and how eventually their daughter became a Christian music artist. You may have heard of her, Rebecca St. James. And two of their sons formed the group for King and Country. And so this is the story of them coming to America. And the mom is certainly a strong character in the movie. So, if you're still looking for something to do for your mom on Mother's Day, you could probably go see the movie this afternoon. I won't tell anybody. You can just, invite her to go see the movie. I recommend it. It's just a good movie about family. But even they, in the movie, have some dysfunction going on, challenges that they have to face that they don't always respond to correctly. Well, why am I doing this? Because today we're going to look at a classic dysfunctional family. Not on Netflix or Hulu or in the movies. This one is in the Bible. And I appreciate this because I love how the Bible doesn't clean up history. It just tells it how it is. because it's how life is. There's a realness to it. When we read the Bible, even though it was written a long time ago, and I know sometimes we may have struggled to connect with it or the language in it or whatever, but when we really read the stories, we can connect with the stories because we can see similar things going on around us, even if the culture is different and the practices might be different. There's dysfunction, and we all have some of that going on because life is messy and people are messy. And in those times where we're experiencing that, we need hope. Hope that things can change for the better. Hope that God is active and working for good in our lives, even if in those moments we can't see it. Hope to know that we can follow Jesus, even when we're in the middle of the mess, or still feeling the impact of poor choices made in the past, whether they be ours or someone else's. The main character of the story we're going to be looking at over the next weeks is Joseph. He's one of 12 brothers who would eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph was a guy who trusted God when life didn't make sense. He resisted temptation and the abuse of power. He forgave those who had hurt him horribly. And some might wonder when you hear those things, what kind of upstanding family he would have to come from to be that noble, that good. But a real look will reveal that this family was not upstanding at all. In fact, it would probably make the top 10 list of most dysfunctional families ever. How dysfunctional were they? Well, let's walk through the family history as we get started this morning. It's not pretty, but it's important to know. So we're going to summarize Genesis chapters 25 through 36. We'll be in chapter 37 a little bit later. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground and just kind of walk through somewhat of a family tree of Joseph, so to speak. We're going to start with the grandparents on his father's side. This is Abraham and Sarah. You may remember the name of Abraham. He's the one that God appeared to and said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. The nation of Israel comes from Abraham. He is their patriarch, right? And his wife's name was Sarah, and she was unable to have children. And yet God promised that he would have this great nation, which would mean you have to have some children to start this thing off. And so because they were impatient and wouldn't wait for God to fulfill his promise, and they were getting older and older and it wasn't happening, Sarah comes to her husband and says, look, here's my slave girl Hagar, a slave that we brought from Egypt after their time that they'd been down there. Why don't you be with her and maybe we'll have a child through her? And that's exactly what happens, and Ishmael is born. Ishmael becomes the father of the Arab peoples. And the conflict between Ishmael and their later son Isaac, who they would be born to Sarah and to Abraham, even past childbearing age. It was a miraculous birth. And so you have Ishmael and you have Isaac, these two sons, and the conflict begins even back then, and we see the conflict continuing today. Very much in the forefront of our minds. Well, if we follow the line of Isaac and we go to the next level, we see Isaac, and he ends up marrying a woman named Rebekah. Eventually they have twins. At first she's not able to conceive, but eventually God grants her the ability to have children, and she has twins, Esau and Jacob. Isaac, the dad, favors Esau. He's a hunter. He's an outside guy. He's a man's man, we might say. Rebekah favors Jacob. The scriptures say he stayed close to home. He stayed among the tents. He had a different skill set. They were very different. Dad favors one, mom favors the other. That's not going to be a problem at all. Well, Jacob is a deceiver. His name actually is an idiom for that. They didn't name him that on purpose because he was a deceiver, obviously, at that point. But there's a Hebrew idiom that kind of fits that name, and that's exactly what he was. And he tricks his brother, so to speak, or he gets his brother Esau to transfer his firstborn birthright. And then he tricks his dad by dressing up like his brother. His dad can't see very well, and he tricks his dad to bless him with the firstborn blessing instead of Esau. Well, as you might imagine, Esau's not real happy about this. And so his plot is that when dad dies, I'll take care of brother. Well, mom gets wind of this, and so mom decides to send Jacob away to protect him, but to find a wife. And so he goes back to her family, and he finds not one wife, but two. These are two daughters of a man named Laban. And he loves Rachel. He sees her and he falls in love with her almost immediately. It's like a love at first sight story. And he agrees to work for 7 years in order to have the right to marry her. This would not have been unusual in that day. I know it sounds a little strange to us. And so he works for 7 years, and then he ends up, what he thinks is having Rachel on his wedding night. But when he wakes up in the morning, it's actually her older sister, Leah. Dad pulled a switch, and the deceiver has been deceived. I can't really wrap my head around this one, honestly. And I don't really know how it happened, but that's what went down. And so he ends up with Leah as his wife, and yet he loves Rachel. And so he agrees to work for another 7 years so that he can have Rachel as his wife. And he does that. So now he has 2 wives, and Leah is able to have children, but Rachel is not. Leah ends up giving him 4 sons. And in that day, having children, especially having sons, was a really big deal. And so after these 4 sons that Leah has, Rachel gets jealous. And so she says, look, here's my handmaiden. And by the way, I know, again, we don't understand this practice. I'm not going to get into it, but it was not totally uncommon in that day. If you couldn't have children, that you would choose to give like a handmaiden to your husband so he could have children through her to keep the family line going. So that's what she did. She gives her handmaiden to her husband, and who ends up having 2 sons. So now we're up to 6. Well, then Leah says, well, if she's going to do that, then I'm going to do that. And she gives her handmaiden to her husband and has 2 sons. He has 2 sons by her. So now we have 3 women and 8 sons at this point. But we're not done yet. Leah ends up having 2 more sons. We're up to 10 and a daughter. And finally, God allows Rachel to have children, and she has a son, and his name is Joseph. He's our main character. Well, Jacob leaves to return to Canaan after getting his wives and having children and becoming very wealthy in flocks and herds. And as he comes back home, he's a little worried about how Esau is going to receive him. Remember the brother that he tricked out of his birthright? So as he comes home, he develops this whole plot, and Esau actually receives him fairly favorably, but there seems to be this tenuous restoration because Jacob's wise enough to know, let's not push this, and so he kind of goes a separate way and lives out somewhere apart from his brother. There's this reconciliation, but you know there's still some issues that are going on there. When we encounter, and then on, keep going in the story. While traveling to a new home, Jacob is taking his family to settle in a new place. His wife Rachel, that he loves, the one that he wanted first, dies giving birth to a second son, who he names Benjamin, son of my right hand. And after Jacob settles back in Canaan, his father Isaac also dies. And so when we encounter Jacob at the beginning of Genesis chapter 37, he has a somewhat restored, though not close, relationship with his twin brother, who he deceived. He's lost the love of his life, Rachel. He's lost his father. And he has 12 sons from 4 different women. Does this sound like a TV show to you? Right? This is what's going on. And I didn't even tell you all the details because some of them I'm just not going to say here right now. There's more to this story that you probably don't want to hear, but that is a part of the reality. And so throughout this story, we see all kinds of issues. Some caused by decisions, some not. We see infertility, we see plotting, we see deceit, we see step-family dynamics, we see favoritism, we see jealousy, we see violence and incest. Those are the stories I didn't talk about. We see death while giving birth. I mean, just all this is going on. All of this provides the family background to Joseph. And it sets up the story that will take up the rest of the book of Genesis. The next 14 chapters really recount the story of Joseph. So if you have a way to look at Scripture, I want to encourage you to open, if you would, to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It's 50 chapters long. We're going to pick it up in chapter 37. So with all that as a background, the story is introduced to kind of get us going this way. In verse 1, Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. He's kind of returned home. And this is the account of Jacob's family line. And we're going to hear mostly about one of his sons in particular, although we will talk about other ones. But Joseph seems to rise up to be the main character. And right away we see that. Joseph, a young man of 17. So now we find he's 17 years old at this point. He's witnessed and been a part of a lot of this history, but not all of it. He hasn't seen all of it. But he's aware of some of these dynamics. He's a young man of 17 who was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zillah. Those, by the way, were the handmaids, his father's wives. and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. Really, the idea is through Rachel. And he made an ornate robe for him. You've probably heard of this idea of the robe of many colors or whatever. These robes were often a sign of position or status in that society. So it's not just about something pretty or attractive. It's about something that signifies something. So every time he wears this robe, which would have been regularly, there's a message being sent to everybody else, including his brothers. And he's on the younger side of his brothers. And yet he is favored by his father. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. When we meet Joseph at the age of 17, one of the first things we're told about him is that he is Jacob's favorite son. And everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. Now, I know in families we often joke if there's multiple children, who's the favorite, right? We often do that. It's not funny when there's a real perception of that. I know at different times my children would wonder why I was acting in some way of grace to one of my children when I hadn't seemed to have done that towards another, right? You have to be completely even all the time to all of your kids. That's the standard that you have to meet. Yeah, right? So my way of handling this, I just put this out there. This is free advice. When they would come to me and say, you're favoring or you love so-and-so more, I would just say, yep. Kind of shut down the conversation. But I all knew when they did it, I would say the same thing about all of them, so it ended up working out. Again, it's funny to joke about, but to this degree, it was causing major issues within the family. The second thing we see about Joseph is that he brings home a bad report about his brothers to his dad. This is an unwise decision. We today might say he's tattling. He's a tattletale. He's the informer in the family. Does your family have an informer? One who watches all that goes on and makes sure that mom and dad know what everyone else has done? The informer never seems to inform on themselves, but is very good at informing on everyone else, just to make sure that we're all aware of what's happening here, right? Today we also might use the word snitch, right? Snitch. And the idea is, as we read these verses, can you feel the tension? Can you feel that things are not going to go well? If this is the way we're introducing the story, we're not exactly, once upon a time in a wonderful world in a land far, far away, whatever it is, and there's wonderful things happening. Right away we know that there's problems within this family. So why do we need to know all that I've shared so far? Especially on this Mother's Day. This seems like somewhat of a downer. But every one of us has a background, right? We all do. A backstory that tells how we got to where we are and who influenced us along the way. We all have a context of some kind. And we need to understand that our families do shape us. And listen to me here. They do shape us. There is no doubt that our families influence us and shape us. But hear me, they do not have to define us. And especially if you've been a part of a family with a lot of dysfunction, maybe that's the point you need to take. You are not just a victim of what has taken place, even if terrible things have happened. You are influenced and impacted by your family. You do not have to be defined by it. Over the course of this series, we're going to see change happen. We're going to see a spoiled favorite son become the compassionate rescuer of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. We'll see a neglected oldest son end up offering the lives of his own children to protect his youngest brother. We're going to see a self-centered, pleasure-seeking middle son grow up as he offers to remain as a slave for the rest of his life so that his youngest brother can go free. We're going to see a family with all kinds of dysfunction, and yet as we move through, we're going to see growth. We're going to see things and steps being taken that are honorable, that involve sacrifice. And in seeing this point lived out through Joseph's family, we see that there's hope for each of us. We all come from families who go through periods of dysfunction. Some are just more noticeable than others. Some of you have grown up in families where a family member was or is an alcoholic, an abuser, an addict, had an affair, or any other situation that we might define as difficult or dysfunctional. And you bear the effects of those decisions. There's no doubt about that, and we should not deny it. It's a reality. Each of us is shaped by the experiences and the families that we've come from, but the good news is that our family experiences do not have to determine our future. They don't have to. Like we will see with Joseph, Reuben, and Judah, we each must make choices that will define our lives. And in each case, their choice of what to do with God was the strongest factor of influence. And that's what we want to draw out of the story. Each experienced redemption, though it took time and did not come easily, and we can too, if we don't excuse ourselves. See, sometimes we use our dysfunctional families, or at least the experiences we've had, as an excuse for our bad behavior. The thinking goes along the lines of, I am the way I am because of my family or this family member in particular, and that's just the way it is. It's not my fault, and I can't change. We are right in that what has happened to us is often not our fault. Some things, even amongst you listening, either online or here today, I'm sure there's some pain involved in your backgrounds, things perhaps that were said or done that have impacted you deeply, that you had no choice over. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. We did not choose some of the things that took place, but that does not give us a free pass to become that way ourselves or refuse to change. The story of Joseph's family tells us loud and clear that change is possible, regardless of your background or family baggage. We have the ability and responsibility to make our own decisions, to chart a new path. Yes, there will be obstacles to overcome. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, we will continue to discover ways that we have been shaped by our families as we move through life, perhaps that we were even unaware of at first. But we will be held accountable for the choices we make. And with God's Spirit giving us the will and the ability, we can make choices that will honor Him and bless others, no matter what we have experienced. We can make decisions to sacrifice for others when we could expect everyone to sacrifice for us, because what have we been through? A victim mentality says, it's all about me. It's all about what I've been through. So I can't help anybody. I need everybody else's help. But it's opposed to saying, again, acknowledging what has happened, but saying that doesn't keep me from being someone who can bless someone else and be used for good in other people's lives. We can make decisions to stop patterns of destruction and instead lay the foundation for new patterns that give life and hope. We don't have to keep going down the same road. We can change. Even when it feels impossible, I can't, God can, if we would submit ourselves to Him and trust Him in the process. Now, I want to pause here to give a word of encouragement. I know this is, we're kind of starting off on a downer because, again, this is just the reality of the story. And as we move through, we'll see God work in the lives of this family. But a word of encouragement, because not all of our experiences in our family are dysfunction, right? Some of us could say, and me included, I've been tremendously blessed to be in a family where there's, I would say, literal in the way of dysfunction. Very thankful in multiple families that have been very close to me, have touched my life, for that to be the case. We all have our issues, we all have things, but I'm very thankful for that. And so I want to just acknowledge, the parents who have gone before, who have invested lives and given sacrifice. And here on this Mother's Day, moms are at the top of the list of that, who often very literally lay down their lives to serve their families, to love them well, even perhaps to the point of, denying themselves of perhaps what they might want in order to do what they believe is best. And I want to honor that, because lives of sacrifice are not easy. And yet, many of us are here today to some degree because of the sacrifices that were made on our behalf by our moms, by our parents, by people who loved us, whoever that may be. And that is good and should be celebrated, and we should express gratitude. We should. Many moms, parents have lived out Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, which say, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. It's not about you. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. I can't think of a better category of person that this verse might fit than moms. Thank you to all of you who have sacrificed so much, so often for us. I don't know about you, but at Christmas time, I often receive cards, and sometimes you've done this, where you try to take the family photo so you can use it for your Christmas card. How many of you have done this or had this experience? This is a wonderful experience, by the way, if you haven't done it, especially when you have young children, where you try to get them all to, smile and do what you want them to do for the picture so that you can have this snapshot. And what I find funny about this experience is when you finally get the one that you want, right, and you send it out, and everybody gets it, or however you distribute it, they look at it and they're like, oh, what a beautiful family. And I always chuckle to myself, do you know how many takes it took to get that picture? 10, 20, 30, whatever it was, right? Because often what we see on the outside is the best, but we don't always see what it took to get there, what goes on underneath to make that happen, right? And so then many times in life, that can be true, that kind of the outward look that we have, everything's good, everything's okay, but sometimes underneath we feel like we're barely holding on. All of us are there to some degree with stuff going on below the surface, but we don't have to let it define us. We're all free to make our own choices. It's one of the gifts that God has given to us, and He's promised that He will help us in making choices that will be for the benefit of others and for His honor and glory. He will help us in this process. And so as we begin this series, I just want to begin with an opportunity just to reflect. And so as we close this message and close our time together, I just want to encourage you, if you would, bow your heads and just close your eyes and just have a moment or two of reflection. And I'm going to lead you through a couple of questions, and I just want you to talk to God about these things. First of all, what do you have to express gratitude to God for your family? Just take a couple seconds here and just, in your mind, express gratitude to God for the family you came from, perhaps the family you have now, but family is His design. He intended it for the good of humanity, and there's much good about it. Express some gratitude, if you would, right now. Would you just do a little self-reflection? How has your family impacted you? Especially for those who may be earlier on in their parenting journey. As you reflect on that, what are some of those things that you would want to keep that were blessings? And what are some things that need to change? And then lastly, where are some areas where you just need to engage with your family? I'll leave it open-ended because I don't know exactly what that'll look like for you, but it could be a word of encouragement. It could be just pursuing some more time spent with this individual. It could be a word of warning or even a word of challenge, but in a loving way. Father, thank you for family. You designed family from the very beginning to be the bedrock, not just as an institution, but as a relational unit, a place where parents would come together in a solid marriage and love each other well, and then would have children that they can create that safe, secure environment for and pour into to develop other human beings and point them towards you. There's no greater discipleship opportunity to influence people to follow Jesus than within our own homes. You designed it this way. Yet even as I say it, I'm aware, and we're all aware of how many ways that can be broken and twisted and the mess that we can create even within our families. Why? Because we're the closest. We know how to say words that offer great encouragement and touch each other deeply, but we also know how to hurt. Father, thank you for the forgiveness that you offer to us. For the things and the words that we've said that weren't right, that did more harm than good. May we repent of that and come to you and receive the forgiveness that you offer. And would you help us to walk this path wherever we are in it, grandparents, parents, kids, wherever we are in this family dynamic. Lord, would you help us to walk it dependent upon you, seeking your help daily, knowing that this is a task that is too great for us, that I'm prone to make part of the mess because of my own selfishness and things that I do and say that aren't helpful. And so I need your help, and we need your help, so that family can be what you designed it to be. Because I believe most, if not all of us, have also experienced the positive, the words of affirmation, the sacrifice to help us move forward, whatever it has been that has shaped and formed who we are today. And so thank you to those who have done that for us. And may we be people who now do it for those that we are around, that we call to one degree or another family. Lord, on this Mother's Day, that we celebrate moms and the sacrifice and the love that they give, we thank you for them and pray your blessing upon them. May we honor them today, because that's a really good thing to do. I pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, as we wrap up our time together, you have opportunity after the service to go try to do one of those photos. There's a photo booth out there in the room out there, so you can go and, you can take as long as you need. Take as many pictures as you want. It's all good. Take advantage of that. Have a great day celebrating moms. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Have a great week.